Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'll go ahead and get us started. I know there might be a few more join, and I'm Joseph Arp. I'm with Wayne Davis Concrete. I'm the Safety and Environmental Director here. Also, I chair the Safety and Committee and Sustainability Committee at the Georgia Ready Mix Concrete Association. So, I've got the pleasure of introducing our two speakers for today. And first of all, let me say thank you to them both, and then also for everyone joining. I feel like this webinar here, our safety series web seminars, I believe this one might top them all off so far. So, first speaker I'd like to introduce is Dennis Kenne. And Mr. Kenne, he's been practicing law for 31 years and is currently in a partnership with a law firm down in Savannah. And he also founded his firm's commercial ground transportation practice group and the firm's emergency response team, and for on scene assistance at commercial motor vehicle accidents. And his diverse client base ranges from international manufacturers and shipping lines, as well as national, regional, and local motor carriers. He is also a registered neutral with the Georgia Office of Dispute and Resolution, and has meditated numerous personal injury, business, and interpersonal disputes. Um, it goes on to say that he began his career after graduating with honors from Syracuse University Army Reserve Officers Training Corps and completing his legal training with honors at the University of Miami School of Law in 1993. While at Miami, Dennis served as an articles and comments editor for the school's business law journal and co-chaired the Students Bar Association law related education programs. Then after school, Dennis completed the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's, which is JAG Corps Officers Basic Course, and served as an active duty in the U.S. Army from 1993 to 1999, holding various legal positions, including government contract attorney, procurement fraud advisor, prosecutor, and criminal defense attorney. Dennis is a licensed practice law in the state bars of Florida and Georgia. He serves on the board of directors for the Georgia Motor Trucking Association, is a member of the Transportation Lawyers Association and the Savannah Bar Association, where he chairs the Bar Grievance Committee. Dennis speaks to trade associations and legal groups on various transportation and product-related topics in such places as France, China, England, and Garden City, Georgia. So, what a bio to say. And then I'd like to go on to Kevin Elrod. Patrick Kevin Elrod is originally from Gainesville, Georgia. He grew up in the trucking industry. And I want everyone to hear this. He first drove when he was 14 with his father hauling grain. He spent 27 years in the U.S. Army as an infantryman and the airborne, and with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Upon retirement, Kevin drove OTR, transporting food grade oils in and around the Southeast for 4 years. He left driving and entered the world of trucking safety with Howard Shepherd Incorporated, making director of safety. Kevin was offered a position with the USDOT FMCSA in 2019 and has now been with the agent as a special agent and safety investigator for 5 years. Kevin is married with 2 daughters. And again, thanks both of you guys for joining and giving up your time on this beautiful Wednesday. And I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Great. Well, Joseph, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen here and put up the PowerPoint that Kevin and I'll use. Will that come up okay? Leslie, can you folks see that all right? Okay, great. Yes. Thanks. Well, again, good morning, and I hope everybody's doing their best to get through the Helene recovery process. I hope everybody's safe. And as I mentioned before this call even really started, our prayers are with those in the path of that Milton, which sounds like it's going to be a horrible storm down below. As Joseph had mentioned, I do chair my firms, and I formed my firm's emergency response team, which is probably the most relevant piece of information you heard in my bio today as it relates to what we're going to talk about. and we'll jump right into it. I just want to first give Kevin a chance if he wants to say anything in addition before we get going here.
I appreciate it, Dennis. Just a quick second. Joseph, I want to tell everybody here that I really appreciate allowing me to be here today. Myself and Dennis, we have worked together on fatal crashes. We've worked together in non-fatal crashes. I've helped Dennis out with a few things, and Dennis has advised me on a lot of stuff. We've become great friends. Did not meet him on the JAG end, being in a Ranger battalion. I was sure I would have, but I didn't. But anybody in here today that has served this country or been a spouse of someone who served this country, I want to tell you first off that I appreciate your service, and Dennis, I appreciate your service and your friendship. And I look forward to this today. This is the first time me and Dennis have ever done this together like this. So if it winds up being a little Laurel and Hardy, then it's probably my fault. But you go ahead, Dennis.
Well, hardly, Kevin. Thank you for those kind words, and I amplify those as well. Really, thanks. Kevin and I have had a good relationship over the past. It's getting close to probably 20 years, I suspect. It really has been a while now. But we'll get right into what we're doing in a little bit. As you can see by the title of this program, you just rolled a truck, what now? And really, we're going to talk about some of the things we do as both an emergency response team and Kevin from the both. I used to meet Kevin at these accident scenes when he worked out in the civilian world, and we would do this stuff together. And we would coordinate with folks like Kevin when we were out there as well. We do want to encourage anybody, if you have any questions during the presentation, just jot them in. We're going to either we'll see them or Leslie's going to be keeping an eye on for, any kind of questions. We're open to answering them as they come up. And we'll also, again, at the end of the presentation, try to give you an opportunity as well, assuming we've got some time to do so. But many folks have asked me, what is it that I really do? And I do have a good friend who had a child of about 12 who asked, what does Dennis really do for a living? He knew I was an attorney. And he described it. I thought it was the best description I'd heard of what I do. And he says, I tend to take a pile of manure and try to turn it into roses. And that is exactly what, in hindsight, like, well, I guess that's what I do try to do. I try to take a bad situation, which you guys can be in. If I can figure out how to do a down page. There we go. There's my graphics that I got here going today. That's exactly what we got to try to do. We don't have a very good situation usually if we're out at an accident scene, but we do want to protect everybody, and we want to at least get everybody through it the best we can. And we'll talk a little bit about both catastrophic accidents, and I just put this laundry list of items of things that we will generally do out at a scene, and we're going to talk more specific about some of them. But I want to point out that when I list for catastrophic accidents, we coordinate with independent adjusters, coordinate with accident reconstruction experts. We assist in coordinating with drug and alcohol testing if it's applicable, and if they need the assistance. We do initial photographs of the scene, initial statements, and getting access to the vehicles is very important. And what's also important, if you look at the list of non-catastrophic accidents, we basically do the same thing. We have to treat every one as if it's going to end up being a large claim, because history has told us that a lot of them really end up being large claims. And Kevin, I know, Kevin, did we lose you, Kevin? Maybe you jumped to my next page. And Kevin knows he can jump in and he's going to talk about something specifically. But if you have anything to add, Kevin, as I'm going through any of these points, by all means, just cut me off. When we look at handling an accident scene, there's several areas that we look at. I'm going to focus a lot on protecting the driver and the motor carrier, and I have in parentheses there the corporate officers. And I'll explain why the corporate officers may need some protection as well, depending on the gravity of the accident and a lot of steps that led up to the accident. Complying with the FMCSR, and Kevin's going to be talking about some specifics with that. And we've got to deal with the media, and we got to deal with law enforcement, as well as collect and assess the data at the scene, and collect and assess data that's in your offices and your records and your training materials. All that become relevant to what we need to do. If if Kevin did get cut off, I know he wanted to mention it too, that his job is there also to, quite frankly, to protect drivers and motor carriers. And he tries to do a lot of this before the accident. Kevin, have we lost you? I think we have. And I bet he's probably trying to log back on.
Yeah, he'll come back.
Yeah,
It's that government computer.
That's those 15 screens he was talking about having in his office. I kind of know where he's going to work in, so we won't leave him behind on anything. But as I mentioned, we do want to look a lot at protecting the motor carrier. What do we do in that scenario? If I can get to my right screen here. And, you know, our drivers are our lifeline out there. You know, maybe your driver won't be with you down the road when this accident happens, you know, 6 months, 9 months after the accident happens. And I always say how we treat the drivers on the day of the accident, it's a very special day in their lives for some of them. Sometimes it's the very first accident they've ever had or been involved in. But how we treat them and the role we try to help ensuring them that they have in this process can really help decide how much of this manure is going to end up looking like roses. It's a very stressful scenario. If any of you have ever been in a commercial motor vehicle yourself, you may very well know that. You know, the forces involved sometimes are very great. We could have maimed somebody, we could have killed somebody, and there's a lot on a driver's mind. You know, they could have criminal charges that they could potentially be facing. So there's a lot going through their mind, and if they haven't been through it, it's important for them to have some guidance through this. And sometimes insurance companies will get me on the scene to do that. And the sooner usually I'm involved, I'll say the better of a chance we have of trying to help preserve what we need to do and help get the driver and the company through it. We try to ingrain it in our drivers very early. And the very first thing I tell them when I reach them on the phone, and I usually get a first chance to speak to them as I'm driving out to wherever the accident scene is. After I've spoken with the insurance folks, usually my next call is to the driver, because I want to make sure they're just not out there rambling, that they're, you know, we want to cooperate with law enforcement. And I know Kevin will reiterate that when he comes back on the line as well. But what we want to tell them, hey, just wait till I get there. Let's talk to them together. Let's find out what's going on and then kind of add to what they need. And sometimes, quite frankly, when I hear some of the facts, I'm like, you know what? Our driver's just too shaken up right now. Let's give him a day, officer, and let's maybe revisit things with him tomorrow. Just get him out of that environment. And it's sometimes very helpful. I had a driver once, I was literally on the phone with him telling him about that. And he goes, hey, hold on 1 second. He comes back about 30 seconds later. I was like, hey, is everything okay? He goes, yeah, the cop just had some questions for me. And I was talking to him about it. And it was right after I just told him, don't speak to law enforcement until I get there. So there's a lot on their minds. And, you know, there's a lot they've got to contend with and deal with. So what we try to do, it always helps me, is to try to put some things in writing to them. And I usually give them something, if you can see it on this one, driver information sheet. And there's some do's I tell them. Again, we want to cooperate with law enforcement if we can. But I'm there to protect their rights, the driver's rights and the motor carrier's rights. So if there's something that crops up that I'm like, let's just put a freeze on it, I'll say, listen, we're just not prepared to talk yet. And then we do so. I do inform them that you're represented and I'm their attorney. And I'll conduct all the interviews and questioning. We do tell them to take some photos if involved in the accident sometimes. It's helpful to the scene. I know a lot of motor carriers have requirements, but they do provide a camera, or they tell folks to take pictures of damage and whatnot. Sometimes we got to be a little bit careful exactly what they're taking photographs of, so we try to walk them through that as well. Following all instructions from the motor carrier is also very important. And to direct all media requests to my law firm if I'm involved. Believe it or not, it helps to be media savvy and knowing when to just say no comment. Quite frankly, that's should be a rare situation in my view. I think we should always prepare to have something to say to the media with respect to some kind of major accident. And you've seen the news, and how many times have you heard we've reached out to so-and-so and they had no comment? That's your first opportunity to start painting the picture that you want to paint of what happened here. And it doesn't have to be argumentative or anything else, but sometimes we just say, hey, listen, if it's a fatality, even if it's not our fault, and we think it's clearly the other party's fault, we say, hey, you know, the motor carrier, they're very sorry that all this happened. Their thoughts and prayers go out with the family in this particular case, and leave it at that. But sometimes that's better than saying nothing at all. I also have a do not do. And this is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you don't speak to anyone about the accident other than your terminal manager, motor carrier management, myself, someone in my office, or from our insurance company. We don't want them even speaking to anyone from the insurance company for the other folks involved in the accident. Oh, I did get Kevin is trying to get back on. He says internet is still not very good here from the hurricane. So hopefully we'll have Kevin back soon. The process we start to do is with document collection. There's going to be a number of documents we're going to be interested in getting from both the motor carrier and from the driver. And we say, don't throw anything out. Don't delete anything from your phone. Let's get some snapshots. Let's get an image of a phone if necessary. It's always going to become relevant in a claim down the road. Everybody's always going to want to see that. And complying with the FMCSR, I mentioned earlier about the drug and alcohol testing. We often have to assist with that. We say, hey, listen, it's required. Sometimes the motor carrier's got a lot of other things on their mind, and sometimes it just slips their mind, particularly for some small carriers that maybe just have a couple power units or even one power unit. It just might not come across them because they're so involved in every other aspect of this accident. So we're there to make sure those kind of things take place. We have access to, and so do you folks, obviously, have access to mobile drug and alcohol testing units. We've got one that comes around sometimes and will take a urine sample or a blood sample right there at the scene if we can't get the driver somewhere. But again, just things we need to look at. Kevin, we'll give Kevin a few seconds here. I hope he can join because I know he's got a bunch of comments he wants to talk about, specifically about the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, and he was going to jump in at this point to do it. I may come back to it if he is unable to at this time. But some of the things I'll mention that I know you need to be thinking about. This is really pre-accident, and as I mentioned, Kevin, in his role, his job is to try to help protect folks prior to an accident. So hey, education is an important thing. Understanding and knowing about a substance and alcohol use and testing, obviously. I would say probably less than 1% of the accidents that I have handled or represented motor carriers in had anything to do with alcohol or any type of substance abuse. Very, very rare. But we all know it's a requirement to have the testing done. And Kevin I'm sure want to emphasize that as well. What I might do is I may come back to his safety reg slides, if it's all right with everybody. And he will talk some more about standards and qualifications of drivers and hours of service, which is always a big thing. And he's going to talk about what we say is the next week of what happens after the day of the accident. And there's a number of things that he does. And I'll talk also about what I do in the next week, where it could be an accident scene for several hours. It just really hinges, sometimes 6 hours. You just don't know. Sometimes we're coordinating with an accident reconstructionist to try to get them there to start doing a digital imaging of the scene. Sometimes the vehicles are on hold from law enforcement, so we can't really do much with them. Other times they're not. So we may start to either do a download of a control module to try to get any kind of data off the truck. But if we can't, what we cannot do at the scene, and if the vehicles get towed away, we do it in the next several days. Like I said, including any kind of inspections of our vehicle. And that's the time, we've got a lot of interest in any other vehicles involved in the accident. So we do our best to coordinate with any of the other parties. Some of them get represented very quickly. If some of you have been in any kind of commercial motor accidents, you're aware of how quick you can possibly get a letter of representation from an attorney saying, we represent this person who was in an accident with your vehicle. And that can happen very quickly. So we try to take the ball from there and run with it and coordinate the inspections and anything else that needs to do. We also, at that time, kind of step back and take a deep breath and say, okay, what records do we need to collect? What do we need from the motor carriers themselves? And we always want a copy of a DQ file. We want all maintenance records on the vehicle. Of course, we want logs, and of course, with electronic logs are the easiest thing. We can usually get several downloads pretty quickly. And of course, dash cam footage has become much more popular. I don't know how popular it is, quite frankly, in the type of vehicles that you folks utilize, but it has helped us and it has hurt us tremendously. But one thing it does do is it's very objective in what it tells happened. So we can right then pretty early evaluate what we think about a claim. And if this is one like, oh, clearly we see that we ran a stop sign, there's no doubt about it, we look to get that thing resolved pretty quickly. So the video can help in a lot of ways. We also collect a lot of body cam footage from law enforcement. You'd be surprised at the statements we hear from that, but it also gives us if we're not in it from day one, we've got a law enforcement officer who is there and he's walking around and he's got his body cam on the whole time and he's talking to witnesses. So we're gathering data on who these witnesses are, what they're saying, how we perceive them to be as witnesses themselves, and how they think they'll testify. Was Kevin able to join us back, Leslie? I saw a thing that pop on. Kevin, you're with us now?
I admitted him, so.
Nope, he's probably just still having some issues. That's
There we
okay.
go.
I will come back to his, like I said, I know he's got some points, but these are points we can talk about. If he's not on, I'll just come on back to it. Or we can all agree that I just said nice things about Kevin and talked about all his parts. And we can, but there's a big question some folks might ask. Okay, Dennis, you talked about it. You got catastrophic type claim, and you got non-catastrophic type claims. And Kevin, you back with us, buddy?
I am here. I apologize for that.
No problem. I'm going to go back
to
to
the internet. They're still working on trees here. They're still, I mean, it's still real spotty where I'm at. So I apologize.
I'm going to go back to these slides, Kevin, and let you talk through. I jumped ahead and started talking ahead just so we had some, just to continue with the program. And I just talked about some of the do nots. And when we got into complying with the FMCSRs and whatnot, and your slides came up. So I wanted to, I'll stop there and I'll just advance the slides as you need me to.
Okay. Won't take but a moment. One of the things that you want to look at, especially with, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things you want to look at as far as an accident goes is like, it's anything, and I've worked with Dennis on being on the trucking side of an accident, and I understand what the attorneys are doing to protect you, but also understand what the attorneys are doing to prosecute you. So one of the things that I always try to make sure companies have at hand when I come in to do a crash review, the one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to only look at the crash driver. With that crash driver, I'm going to look at the driver qualification file. I need to make sure that everything, all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed in that driver qualification file. If you have annual reviews, they need to be done in accordance with the regulation, making sure that your application process was complete. You have a current copy of the health card. You have a current copy of the CDL and or road test if needed. If you're a hazmat carrier, that road test is required. But all of the 391.51 regulations will apply. After I request the driver qualification file, I'm going to request the CCF where the driver, if this was an accident, where the driver was required to, or if your policy had the driver. You still there?
Yes.
Okay. Now we're losing power. So, but where the driver has everything in the file that they need as far as the drug and alcohol. So some companies will require a driver to take a post-accident even if not needed. And then the regulation will require a driver to take a post-accident just standing alone. So either way, I will need a copy of the CCF. If it's been a few days, which we usually will wait about a week before we come in, we'll get the results page for that. I need to see the post-accident review, copy of the crash report if available. If not, I can get a hold of that for you, and I will share that crash report with you if I can get it. Dennis and I usually.
You're breaking up some, Kevin. Unless that's me.
Dennis, you want to go ahead and jump to the,
Yes,
okay,
I just texted Kevin. I'm gonna tell him just to call me on my cell, and I'll put him on my speaker.
okay, that
Hopefully he
works.
can be able to get through. Sorry about that, folks. Sometimes technology is wonderful. Sometimes it's not so wonderful.
And sometimes you have hurricanes.
And that's true. Here comes Kevin now. Kevin, can you hear me okay? Yes. Can folks, Leslie, can you hear Kevin if he speaks?
Not real well.
He's showing us muted.
Or yeah. There we go.
Yeah, my
He
service
said-
is starting to come back better now.
Okay, there we go.
Excellent.
So basically what you will need about this is your driver qualification file. I'm going to review the crash driver and the crash driver only. I'm going to look at the drug and alcohol testing for that driver and that driver only. I'm going to get into your vehicle maintenance. I will look at the vehicle maintenance for the vehicle involved in the crash. And we're going to go through each step by step with the crash. I'm going to look at any of the video that you have from the crash to see if I can maybe use a little bit of that to not pin blame, but basically look at an at fault or a not at fault for your SMS. And then I can share verbally my findings with your attorney if allowed. But usually what will have to happen is anything you get from me, if you'll advance that for me, Dennis, anything you get from me will have to be FOIA'd from any attorney with any agency. So if it's prosecuting attorney, they're going to have to FOIA request any of the documents that we request. They'll have to FOIA any of the documentation as far as the crash review from us.
Kevin, can I add a point there for a second?
Yes.
And that's a great point that he mentions that, because that's something we'll do as well. And if counsel is not involved in the case, I encourage motor carriers to do it. It's sending either a Freedom of Information Act request or a Open Records Act request to pretty much any law enforcement agency that touches its hands on this matter. We always send the request to get any kind of data, and that's usually where we will get our body cam footage from, which, like I said, as I mentioned, is usually at least helpful. It helps round out the picture for us sometimes. But we always look at those avenues. Where can we get this, say, free information from to help along with the investigation? Sorry, Kevin, all yours.
And the one thing that you will get, and here's a little difference in the FOIA request. So when I do a closeout with a crash review with you, the carrier, you're going to get the carrier copy of the review. Now, there are two different types of copies, and maybe I should say this, maybe I shouldn't, but I think it's should be noted. There is a copy that has narrative that I put in with how I came to the conclusions I came to with the investigation. You will receive at closing a copy of the carrier copy. When you FOIA the copy, you FOIA a full copy, and you will get the copy that has the narrative in it. So you can see my conclusions, you can see the evidence, you can see everything. So your attorney will, if he or she knows what she's doing, they will FOIA that request to the FMCSA so they can get a copy of that. So there may be something that they didn't see. There may be something that they need that would help in your defense.
Thanks, Kim. You want me to scroll to some other sections if there's any comments you want to make about any of these other provisions that you had in your slides here?
Yeah, go ahead and forward a slide for me, Dennis.
All right. All fiction drivers. And then your last one was hours of service.
Yes, that's a big one. One of the things that I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at the day of the crash and the previous 7 days. I'm going to try and put a basis for how your driver drives. Does your driver drive on a 60-hour clock or a 70-hour clock? I'm going to go through, and even if it's an EROD, I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at the GPS locations. I'm going to look at the mileage. I'm going to look at the engine hours. I'm going to see if there's any unplugging. I'm going to request from you those ERODs for those days. I'm going to request from you basically a disconnect report. I'm going to ask from you to provide me or actually demand a provision. There's a provision that lets me demand your edit report. So anything that goes along with that ELD, everything that is in that ELD, edit reports, disconnect reports, unassigned driving, any of that, I'm looking for all of it. And I can request, and you must provide that to me. So with that, I will look to see if there's any hours of service violations for that week, anything that could have fatigued the driver that was involved in the accident. But understand this, with cameras and good ERODs and drivers that mind their hours of service and operations and dispatch that do what they're supposed to do, and they don't dispatch ill-fatigued drivers or over their hours, things of that nature. If you will stick to those guidelines, those hours of service will help you in your case. Those unassigned drive time being assigned and accepted will help you in your case. Anything like that, any of those edit reports where something was edited and it had a good note out beside it, that will do nothing but help you in your case. So we say to do that, when you get into a nice large sum suit, you'll understand that all of these findings that we found and the narrative that I put in there, such as carrier unassigned drive time was assigned as applicable for the FMCSR. So it shows in that FOIA requested review, all of my narrative in there that shows you did everything right. The driver was doing everything right, and it's evidenced with the hours of service logs that I pulled. So that'll actually assist your attorney, somebody like Dennis, to help them in gaining a little bit of ground on the prosecution.
Appreciate that, Kevin. Those are great comments, actually. I'll add one little bit about that and mentioned earlier about, hey, I sometimes have got this pile of manure that I'm trying to put a good spin on, and the more that each motor carrier has its ducks in a row, the more it helps us. So it's a lot of, the year prior to the accident is sometimes just as important as the day of the accident when it comes to how you run your operations and how you've kept all your records and documentation. Kevin, the next slide is actually you may have covered some of it, so I'm just going to go to it and you can tell us if it's it talked about the next week, and I started talking about what I would do within the next week. If there's anything you want to add to this, by all means, if not.
One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to interview the driver. I'm going to interview the driver, and my questions are going to be based on nothing but the driver's responsibilities while behind the controls of the CMV and what happened during the crash. I'm basically going to talk to the driver and ask the driver how long they've been driving a truck or a commercial vehicle. The day of the accident, did you feel fatigued or feel ill or anything that morning? Was there anything out of sorts that you might have been involved, maybe arguing, anything that may have dampened your spirit? Was there anything where you were having issues with your employer? And basically what I'm doing is I'm looking to see if there was anything that could have interfered with the driver's judgment on that day. I would say 99% of the time, the drivers were always, no, I got good sleep. I came in, I was driving, and out of nowhere, here come a car. And that's normally what I hear. But I will talk to the driver and I will ask the driver, how many hours a day are you allowed to drive? As a professional driver, you should know that 11 hours is the answer. How many hours are you allowed to drive in a period of a day working? They should know that 14 hours. If they're a local driver, I'll ask them, hey, do you take a 30-minute break during the day and just kind of, get out and stretch? But it's nothing, too intrusive. It's basically based all around the regulation and what do they know. I'll look at your records, like I said a minute ago. And the one thing I did want to hit on is the long form. So as a motor carrier safety director, I learned the hard way that having a long form can make you liable. And Dennis might can hit on this on a legal point of view. But if I come in and just say that you got a driver, it was in an accident, and that driver had a heart attack and hit somebody, and it was a fatal wreck. Maybe double fatal. That was one that happened in South Carolina about 6 months ago. Driver had a heart attack going down the road, went across the other side of the interstate, hit somebody head on, killed somebody, and the driver was also deceased as well. So go into the carrier. The carrier has a long form, and on that long form, which, mind you, is protected by HIPAA. The medical card itself is not protected by HIPAA because the urinalysis is donated by the driver. So that is not protected by HIPAA. The long form is protected by HIPAA, but the long form also includes private medical documentation concerning the driver. If you accept this long form here at the U.S. government and with the United States Department of Transportation, we have this phrase called known or should have known. So if you have the long form and your driver had a heart attack while driving, and this long form has on there when this driver had the stent put in or had the bypass operation and waited the period of time and had the medical card, the medical examiner said they're good to drive, and they drove in a court of law and with us, you had knowledge of this driver's heart condition. So if you don't have that long form and you've never seen that long form and you have that driver's medical card, which is all we require you to have at the FMCSA, when you walk into that courtroom, you can lay that card down and you can rest easy that you had a card that you're required to have by the regulatory compliance with the FMCSA. That is all you're required to have. And all you know is that driver was medically cleared by the doctor on the card who is registered with the FMCSA to allow him or her to operate a CMV. That is all you knew. You let that driver drive because that doctor gave you a card saying that the driver was qualified. What that driver's medical condition could have been or was in the past, you have no clue because you only had the one piece of documentation that we require you to have, if that makes sense. And I digress. Dennis, you can hit on that a little bit if you want to, but that's a huge part for me.
Yeah, no, it brings up a good point about what you need to have and what you have in terms of documentation. Sometimes you can't have too much. You can have too much documentation at times. A fine line, I suspect. But and that's the thing. If you've got the documentation, if you got evidence of something that could be up with the driver, the key is just taking action about it in a timely manner before the accident happens. Because regardless, I guarantee, regardless of whether that gentleman's heart condition had, whether it had something to do with the accident or not, some plaintiff's attorney suing you and suing the driver and suing your insurance company, they're going to try to make a stink of it because it creates leverage for them. We've got Kevin and I got too many cases we can even think of in our minds about where we've got just a little bit too much data. Hey, it's there. You just got to deal with it. But it is what it is sometimes. It's a matter of, again, I think the important thing is what you do with it when you have it. Because, not every driver is perfect, right? Everybody's human. Everybody has some things with them. There's some medical conditions that you're allowed to drive with, others you can't. But hey, just make sure you're checking all the blocks when it comes to your drivers, particularly from a medical perspective, because it raises its head frequently in any kind of accident litigation that we get involved in. And I hope all of you have had just a history of maybe minor accidents, which is great, and it brings up for me and for Kevin the next slide of, well, why do we care? Why do we care about how we handle the scene? And as I mentioned, there's catastrophic accidents and there's non-catastrophic accidents. Fortunately, the vast majority of them are non-catastrophic accidents. The unfortunate part of that is that many attorneys who you see on billboards, they try to turn every accident into a catastrophic accident. And they could do it a number of ways, quite frankly. Believe it or not, the medical industry is a haven for them. And there's a number of doctors who they routinely send their clients to who will find traumatic brain injuries, who will find sustained injuries from nothing more than a strain, who will take and run up $50,000 in medical bills for MRIs and other testing just to show that there's some sort of degenerative condition in their back. We all age, we all have problems with our spines, but they'll turn that and say, you see this bulging disc here? That was probably caused by the accident. And then you've got a value of your case goes way up. And that's why we kind of care about it. And we care a lot in Georgia about it because I'll show you why. There's a American Bar Association journal articles, this is a little bit dated now, but talked about costly collisions and what they do cost some of us. And just to give you an idea, these are some verdicts. You can see the dates of them, everything from 33 million, 27 million, 150 million, 280 million, 66 million. That's a lot of money to me. I assume it's probably a lot of money to most folks who are on this call. And how we insure ourselves and at what level, there's only so much insurance you want to have, because if you've got I deal with some lines that have 100 million in coverage, and you know what, it seems like every case they get hit with, it seems to be $100 million claim to somebody. And what some plaintiffs' attorneys will do is they'll look at, they're entitled to know how much insurance you have in Georgia. So we've got to give it to them. And then all of a sudden we get a demand for that policy limit. So, oh, this is clearly a $5 million demand when it's nowhere near it. If you had $1 million, I guarantee that same attorney would have requested $1 million. It's how they run the game. They just try to maximize what they can get in terms of insurance. And all these figures here, these are all jury verdicts. These are what our neighbors are awarding out there. And these are all Georgia verdicts that we're talking about too. And there used to be some areas of the state that were a lot worse than others, and it is truly spreading. Chatham County has always had we call it a bad venue. It's not a great venue for jurors. Anywhere that's touching Atlanta, we could try to stay away from there when it comes to a jury trial. But I kind of extended it, although there's certainly a zone, I think, of bad venues and bad counties when it comes to large verdicts. And I think it extends from about Chatham County on the East Coast, and it goes over to about, what's the county Albany is in over there on the west. And then it's down to about Valdosta and somewhere up to about Ringgold, Georgia, which covers probably about 148 of the counties that we're dealing with here. It is just not a very friendly environment. And I'll explain in a minute why that is to some degree. But these are the reasons why we got to kind of care about this sort of stuff. There's a publication, it's called the Judicial Hellholes. The American Tort Reform Foundation publishes this periodically. And what it does is it ranks states and cities and counties based on just how bad some of these verdicts are getting and how notorious they are for having very large verdicts for relatively what seems like minor cases. I point this out because it's important, because right now Georgia is the #1 judicial hellhole in the nation, according to this publication. And the reason for that is we have a very plaintiff-friendly Georgia Supreme Court. They've given some very favorable rulings to the plaintiff's bar. There is not as much tort reform. Thank goodness Governor Kemp has that on his agenda again for, I think, for 2025 to really hit hard and try to get some good tort reform in place. We had some successes this year, but they were limited to something called direct action statutes. And that's in essence when an insurance company for a commercial motor carrier can be named in the lawsuit. Plaintiffs' attorneys love naming insurance companies because then the jurors hear, look at that, this insurance company is here, and they assume they're just going to pay whatever the verdict is, which is not the case. But not every state has that. Only 4 states have those direct action statutes. We just passed legislation in Georgia that strictly it restricts it considerably, although there's some circumstances where it can still occur. But needless to say, but there's also a very strong plaintiffs' bar lobby. The lobbyists are very strong in Georgia as well, and the Trial Lawyers Association, which is what the plaintiffs now they call themselves, the American Justice Association. They substitute the word money hungry for justice, so now they're the Justice Foundation, and their goal is to pour in millions of dollars through lobbyists to get the legislation they want in place because they know it'll all pay off. And it's very strong in Georgia. If we look at the history of Georgia a little bit as judicial hellhole, and we notice if you look right around, quite frankly, the pandemic, I think the pandemic was a mark in time. And a lot of people, including myself, thought when the pandemic is over, we thought there may be a really slow, large verdicts coming out. In essence, we wouldn't see many of them. But just the reverse really has happened. We have just seen these extraordinary numbers coming out of juries. One which was a non-trucking case, but involved a vehicle, involved a Ford, was 1.7 billion with a B verdict. That's a real big verdict right there. Bad county, bad judge, bad plaintiff's attorney, a lot of bad factors that came together to get that to happen. But as you can see, as we progressed from even 2020, we were ranked #6, and we've been steady holding the 1 spot. Hopefully we'll lose that and hopefully lose it real soon. Some of the other numbers we look at, and these are all post-pandemic, 2022, another $118 million verdict, $90 million in punitive damages, which is a really a form of punishing the defendant for whatever kind of conduct it did. And that's an example. If you take something, all the records we're talking about, and if we've got too many issues with our record keeping system, or we had poor maintenance on a vehicle, that in some areas can give a jury an opportunity to punish the defendant. Hey, you guys weren't doing what you were supposed to do. You didn't keep the records the way you were supposed to do. You didn't keep your vehicles the way they were supposed to be. Maybe this accident wouldn't happen. And plaintiffs' attorneys, to their credit, they do a pretty decent job, some of them, of trying to turn this into a case of all about the trucking company, all about the concrete mixer. That's what they try to turn it into, when it's really about, well, this plaintiff, they ran a stop sign. Might have nothing to do with it by the time you get to the jury, or the jury might think it's got nothing to do with it. Another, DeKalb County, Bibb County, stay away from them if you can. Sorry if you live there. From 2018 to 2023, 39 nuclear verdicts. And that's a nuclear verdict, judicial hellholes define as a verdict in excess of $10 million. I wish I had this. I used to have the statistic of the number of nuclear verdicts in the 5-year period prior to that, and it was under 10. I think it was under 5. It has just skyrocketed. And again, it's a number of factors that go into it. Here, Fulton, DeKalb, and Gwinnett counties produced 41% of those nuclear verdicts during that time frame. So if you wonder why I try to pick on Atlanta and the surrounding counties, you'll kind of see why. We don't like to be there as a defendant. So enough of that why we care business for the moment. Talking about some enforcement actions, and I'll talk a little bit about drivers can get traffic citations. And one of the things that we we get frustrated with on our end as counsel is that we're not given the opportunity to help the driver fight it. It's usually worth the money, quite frankly, to let us do it. Because we can get the driver not to plead guilty, we can get some kind of reduced sentence, and the significance is if your driver just goes in and pays a fine, seems easy, gets it done for him, it counts as a guilty verdict. So if there's a civil lawsuit that comes down later, a personal injury lawsuit, they can use that as evidence of the negligence, his guilty plea. What we can usually get done is either get it reduced where he doesn't have to have a plea of guilty. There's other types of pleas he can do. Sometimes we'll just get it dismissed. But it turns out being a bigger factor down the road. So our involvement in that, or somebody's involvement in that, is important. And it seems easy just to say, pay it, I can get back on the road. And that might be our advice ultimately, but we might be able to get that done without the same implications. And of course, the civil actions, the civil lawsuits is where I spend most of my day. And that's a whole nother seminar, quite frankly. And the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration issues that we sometimes have to contend with and help respond to some of the violations that are found by the FMCSA and good folks like Kevin's organization. And Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about some of your stuff.
Yes. Dennis was talking about how you're not really in a lot of favorable counties. Just a little side story here. In Albany, Georgia, there was an accident. A driver was driving in inclement weather. Driver was in the right lane of a 4-lane divided highway, driving 10 miles an hour under the posted speed limit during a rainstorm at night. Lights were on, fog lights were working, camera was working, driver was not distracted, driver had seatbelt on. Driver hits a car parked in the right-hand travel lane, and the individual in the car was passed out in the front seat, intoxicated on alcohol and drugs, thought he was in his driveway, and it ended up, carrier had video footage of the accident, carrier had download from the ECM, carrier had video, ELD, speed, everything. The carrier did everything right. And I think the carrier wound up in the millions having to pay for the adverse driver. So when Dennis talks about the counties that you're in and some of these nuclear verdicts, it isn't fair, but it has gotten, it's going down a road that the FMCSA is paying a lot of attention to. And if going to the slide, so if there are problems, the motor carrier can be cited on a compliance investigation. If I come in to do a crash review and your driver was cited in those 7 days or cited on that roadside for speeding, wrong lane, illegal lane change causing the accident, whatever it is, I will cite that on a crash review. And if the driver is convicted, the driver can face fines up to $5,000 from the FMCSA along with the motor carrier. During a closeout, during a crash review, I will cover process breakdowns. So what I do is I do a deep dive into your operations. I talk to your dispatchers. I talk to your operations managers. I speak to your drivers. I speak to your safety department. I talk to the owners. I talk to everybody, and I basically ask the same questions. And on our website, you can go on and go to the search menu at the top, and you can just say safety management cycle. And you can print out the safety management cycle and have it there with you. So we will go through process breakdowns. So a dispatcher, I'll just give you one. A dispatcher, does the dispatcher review the driver's hours of service before dispatching a load to ensure that driver can pick up and deliver that load on time without speeding or violating the hours of service rule. If your dispatchers do not do that, that is a process breakdown, because that is a dispatcher's responsibility. I will go over that process breakdown, and we will go through recommendations that we give on how to set up policies and things of that nature and training. And if we're in your local area, we will even come to the carrier and we will give that training to you. We will come in and do safety meetings with your drivers, things of that nature. But we will go over those process breakdowns. And on the next bullet, we'll give the motor carrier remedies and solutions to those spotted issues that we find. Are fines possible after a review? Absolutely, fines are possible after review. The UFA is the Uniform Fine Assessment. Whenever we come in to do things, you'll notice that, and if you've ever had a review done, you get a questionnaire. And one of the questions on that questionnaire is, how many miles have you traveled in the last 365 days? And what was your gross revenue for the last fiscal year? So the reason we ask that is whenever you are being, fined monetarily by the federal government, they look at what your revenue is and they base that off of the hardships that could come by being fined, and they minimize that fine. So you don't really, it's not as bad as you think, but it is a stamp on your personal SMS record, your company, that you only can see. But when you get a conditional or an unsatisfactory rating on your SMS, your insurance companies see that. They immediately will go up on your help me, Dennis. They go up on your premiums, and then you'll have carriers. There are certain carriers that will not use you, certain shippers and receivers that will not use you if you have a conditional or an unsatisfactory rating. Those ratings are difficult at times to get lifted and to get changed. So what I'll say is, look at 391.51 and make sure that you're in compliance. Look at your 396, make sure that your vehicle maintenance files are right. Make sure that you have all the documentation you need. And if you ever need an email or something of that nature, kind of spelling out what parts you need to look at and what's really important, you can always email me and I can always send that to you.
Thanks, Kevin. I think we're getting close to wrapping up. There's a few things I want to show because I don't think we can emphasize enough the why to care. And if some of the dollars don't impress you with the verdicts, I'm going to show you just some pictures of. Here's an accident. Looks like it's relatively minor. It really was a minor one. And this was the complete total damage to the claimant's vehicle. There was a driver and a passenger. I won't have anyone guess the medical bills, but just come up with a number in your head. And I'm going to show you what each of them claimed as medical bills. And this was actual treatment they received. $200,000 and almost $400,000. That's serious, obviously, from their perspective. And so don't let the amount of physical damage surprise you if you get some sort of claim that looks like it's so extraordinary. And that goes back, like I mentioned, and one of the pet peeves I have is with the medical industry about the doctors that will perpetuate this. And you know what? The doctor's getting paid. It doesn't take them a lot to say, yeah, this injury was related to this particular accident. She has these subjective complaints of pain. Subjectively, she says she didn't have them beforehand. Well, natural conclusion. The doctors are there purportedly to treat the patient and to care for their well-being. But this is kind of what you get. Another one, this was a mother who had, I think, 2 children in the car, and another minor fender bender at a stop sign, basically, in the scheme of things. The mother had $541,000 worth of medical care. Both of the children, I think, had a combined $800 or $900 worth of medical care. These are the ones that are most troubling to insurers, to motor carriers, to me, because you can see it ain't that bad, but it gets blown out of proportion. And that's the real trouble. And jurors are allowing them to blow things out of proportion. And a jury is allowed to say, if you have $541,000 in medical expenses, let's say the insurance company, your health insurance, maybe they pay, let's say, $100,000 for a round number on that, right? Well, in Georgia, they're allowed to tell a jury, I have $541,000 in medical bills. A jury is not allowed to hear that $100,000 of it was paid by insurance and that they're not accountable for the rest. This is what these numbers are what the jury hears, and that's why you sometimes get such extraordinarily large verdicts. But that's why it requires the same level of work, excuse me, sometimes at the very beginning, because we see this and like, this isn't too bad. We know where it can end up. And with that, we'll turn it over for questions. Hopefully we've been informative. Kevin, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. And if anyone has questions, I know we're just about in an hour. I think we're going to try about an hour to hour and 15 minutes. So Leslie, if there's time for questions, we're happy to take them.
So if you have any questions for Dennis or Kevin, please type them in the chat now. We're certainly happy to answer them. I do have, we talked about the drug and alcohol testing, post-accident drug and alcohol testing as part of the, what happens right away. And I do want to just real quickly go over the criteria that trigger a DOT post-accident test, because we see so many DOT post-accident drug tests that are done that shouldn't be done. They maybe should be done as a non-DOT. So just real quick, the criteria are there's a fatality. If the driver gets a ticket for the accident and a vehicle is towed, or the driver gets a ticket for the accident and someone is transported away from the scene for immediate medical treatment. Those are the only 3 criteria that trigger a DOT post-accident test. And remember, you have to do a drug and alcohol test if you're within the time limits. You've got an 8-hour window for alcohol. You have to start documenting after 2 hours if it's not done, but you have 8 hours total. And for your drug test, you've got 32 hours. So just make sure that your folks that are on the scene that are coordinating your response to the accident are aware of that criteria. And if anyone needs that decision tree, let me know or let Emily know or Joseph know. We'll be happy to get that to you. So just a couple quick questions. Why would a company have a long form if it is not required by law? So, Kevin, I think this is when you were talking about the long form physical.
So what happens is when you go to a medical examiner, like when I go to a medical examiner, I still have a CDL. And to answer Joseph's question, in 1984, you could drive around at 9 o'clock at night hauling feed as a 14-year-old kid with long legs and a split shift Peterbilt, but can't do that in 2020. So, but a lot of the health cards are on the back page of that long form. And the long form is protected by HIPAA. It has personal medical information on that form. That's why a lot of times they will give that to the driver and tell the driver to give that to the carrier. The carrier actually needs to have a release sign from that driver to have that document. If you look at the HIPAA regulations, but your medical card, again, is the only thing you are required to have. That is the only thing we require you to have. So if you get the long form, tell the driver, look, don't need your long form. Tear off the health card on the back. Let's get a copy of it to put in our records, and you keep a copy on you, and we are good. And that's basically all it is. But the long form is the driver's physical portion of the qualification process. They always send a copy back to the carrier and give the driver a copy. But I just advise the carrier, The only thing that we require as far as the regulation goes is the health card. And Dennis might be able to hit on the of accepting that, but that is what we require.
I don't have much to add to that, Kevin. And I'm sorry, I was looking ahead to the next question as well that I had some comments on as well. Does that answer the question? Was that Chris that had asked that? Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yes,
oh,
I'm
yes,
good
was
on that.
Chris. Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
I'm good. Yep.
Cool. All right, the next question. How important is a pre-hire evaluation of a driver's MVR, especially the 3-year data review? So we've got, let you take that, Dennis?
Yeah, I'll be happy to comment on that. It's a requirement I think is very important to do. And I'll also say this because it made me think of another point. One of the things that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, I believe they say it very early, is that, they're quote unquote minimum requirements. And in a lawsuit, you'll hear that. So what they'll try to do is say, well, hey, these are you stuck to the bare bone requirements. Couldn't you have done more? Couldn't you look back 10 years of an MVR? They can always play that guessing game. They always play you could have and should have done this, right? That's how they sometimes get juries to award a lot of money. They get juries thinking like that. Doing what the reg says is perfectly acceptable. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'll say this: if you have a policy of looking back 5 years, do it. If you've got a policy that says we look back 7 years, do it. That's when you get yourselves in trouble. If you have a policy that's greater and you don't enforce it. I've seen that more and more times. So if your policy is, hey, we comply with what the FMCSR requires us to do, fine. That's fine. And you know what? Look at it from this way. There's been a lot of data and information and research that went into creating those regulations. They're not just guesswork. There's a reason they say 3 years of data is good. So don't feel hampered by, okay, I got to have more. That is a minimum requirement. It's just if you say, you know what, we're just going to be extra safe, whatever you want to call it. It's not even necessarily extra safe, but whatever it is, just make sure you comply with your own written policies, because that's, like I said, that's really where you'll get into a pinch.
I just want to add one
please.
little thing to that, if I can, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
So the 3-year thing came from a think tank of commercial drivers around the country. They told the FMCSA many years ago that they thought that 36 months of driving a truck should be efficient to being a professional driver. You should be able to learn what you need to learn in 3 years. So pulling a 3-year MVR, one is probably all that your insurance company wants you to know. And I say that because of what I said earlier about known or should have known. Sometimes not knowing is a lot better for you than knowing. And then sometimes knowing more is better. But what Dennis hit on is very important. When I come in to do a regular compliance review, like with a crash review, I'm going to get your policy on unsafe driving and hours of service. But when I come in to do a regular compliance review, I'm going to get your policy on hiring. I'm going to get your policy on dispatch. I'm going to get your disciplinary policy. I'm going to get your hours of service policy, your unsafe driving policy, your driver handbook. I'm going to get everything. And then I'm going to look at your records to see if you're following your own policy. And if you're not following your own policy, now you have process breakdowns. So having those policies in place and having those policies state, we motor carrier are required per policy and the Federal Motor Carrier Regulation to pull a 3-year MVR on the driver. So put in there that you're doing it for yourself, but that we require it also. And if you go beyond that, you can put that in there. It's always good to have that caveat. But a 3-year MVR is just what we require and what most insurance companies require. And sometimes that might be all you want to see.
That's a great point about, 3 years is what is sufficient experience to be a professional driver. So I hadn't heard the rationale behind that. So thanks for that, Kevin.
Yeah.
Next, should we be reviewing DOT review of third-party haulers? I'm assuming that you're asking if we should be reviewing their SMS profile, their safety ratings, that sort of thing. You've got conditional, et cetera. And Tad, if that's not your question, please expand on that. Yep. So Dennis, Kevin, somebody want to take that?
Yeah, I got some. Kevin, do you have any comments you want to put out first about that? No. If not, I'll jump in.
Yeah, with us, we don't really, we don't. That's something more along your lines there, Dennis.
Yeah, no problem. Ted, I'll say this. There are several, I'll say, new causes of action that plaintiffs' counsel are trying to get at. One is, well, should you have looked at these other parties that perhaps you're other third-party haulers and that type of thing? The law doesn't really support a requirement to do so. I go back to, if you do so, always do it. If it's a written policy that, hey, we're going to just do this. And if you find out information you don't like, react to it, do something about it. And I go back to Kevin's point of, if you don't know something about a third-party hauler that you've been using for a long time, you have no reason to suspect it, you're probably in fine shape. I do have some reservations, because it can always come back to bite you one way or the other. If you're in an accident and we use some other folks, it could, right, you didn't know their history. It's a two-edged sword. Yes, well, we should have known. We could have looked at it. It wasn't too hard to look at this and find it out, but there's no requirement to do so. So, it's a bit of a judgment call. And quite frankly, talk to your insurer as well. Some insurers might say, we prefer you to do it or not to do it. And I would say, if your insurer gives you advice one way or the other, I'd go with what they recommend doing on it. It adds a whole nother layer of administration to your processes, and that's something to take into account as well. So I'd just be cautious about doing it if you're going to do it. But if you make the decision, again, go full steam and do it.
All right. Good advice. The last question we've got, Andy asked, if a driver reports to you that they have AFib, can you allow him or her to drive, or should you require a new DOT medical recertification before you allow them to drive again? There are a lot of medical conditions, and Kevin, unless you know specifically, or Dennis, regarding this particular one, number one, I'll be happy to do a quick research after we're off the line, Andy, and get back to you. But do y'all have any thoughts on that?
I don't have initial thoughts about AFib, quite frankly. I'm not sure what the reg says on it.
I always just say you should always err on the side of caution if you've got a medical issue. And not only, a DOT medical as well, but you can also, if you ever have an issue that you're not sure about, you can also require a fitness for duty evaluation, which is separate from a DOT medical exam, but you would want to provide to the doctor who does the fitness for duty the job description, essential job functions, and then, get them to issue an opinion as to if the driver's qualified. We see that a lot for like orthopedic things, if they've had a knee injury or, back injury and that sort of thing. And it's a lot of times it's outside the DOT medical exam requirements, but it's just, you want to make sure that they're safe to do their job and that sort of thing. So, but obviously you want to make sure they're qualified to drive, but you also, it's never hesitate to go one step further. Chris asked, do you have an example? Oh, sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I just want to touch on that just a second. So I always try to tell carriers during process breakdowns and recommendations is anytime a driver admits to you something, you need to always pay attention to the regulation, just like with drug and alcohol. When is a good time to do reasonable suspicion? When a driver admits, hey, I had a drink this morning before I left. I picked up a coffee cup and it still had some schnapps in it from last night. I just didn't realize it until I'd already drank half my cup of coffee. If they admit that, it's your responsibility not to let that driver drive. So when a driver comes up and says, hey, you know what, I've got AFib and I need to know, am I safe to drive? First question you want to ask the driver is, do you feel safe to drive? And if they say yes, say, okay, let me ask you this. When you had your driver's physical, did the doctor there, did you cover with the doctor there? Did you tell the doctor that you had AFib like you did me today? Nothing wrong with you asking. And if the driver says, well, I really don't want to talk about what I mentioned to my doctor, say, well, that's fine. But for our liability purposes, we would like for you to go and take another physical. You have a current card, and that's fine. But, and if the driver says, hey, I don't want to have that, I don't want to do that, make a note and put it in that driver's file that you had that conversation today, and let that driver know that you're making that note and they made you aware of it. Have that driver sign that note, and you sign the note, and have someone in the office witness it, put it in their file. And that's a good way to cover your rear end should something happen. That you asked the driver if they had mentioned that to the doctor. The driver didn't want to answer. You asked the driver to go take another physical. The driver didn't want to do it. And you noted that and put it in their file. Even though we don't require that, that's a good way to cover you. And that's what I would look for, just like drug and alcohol post-accident testing. You can't get the alcohol test done in 8 hours. Guess what? You got to start making that memo every 2 hours until you reach that 8th hour. And I will look for those when I come in post accidents and I see 7 hours later. I'm going to start looking at those 2-hour memos to see you made that note and note of why that driver could not be tested.
Good. All right.
So
Last question, and we'll wrap up. Chris asked, do you have an example you can provide regarding driver do's and don'ts when involved in an accident? And I think some of these were on one of your earlier slides, but if you maybe, Dennis, you've got some words to use, words not to use, that kind of thing might be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great question again. And if it's helpful, I don't mind sending an updated one of those sheets along. Feel free to pass it around, quite frankly.
Okay.
It never hurts for drivers to have the information sooner. I usually don't get a chance to give it to them until after the accident. So that's why I try to do it as soon as I can. But, generally speaking, at a scene, they should always be courteous. They should always be cooperative. And it's okay you can be cooperative and still say, I've got to wait till my counsel or my safety director, somebody gets here before I can speak to you. That's courteous. That's okay to do. And that's still being cooperative. Law enforcement understand it. They're not going to, hold you and say, you talk to us now, you don't talk at all. Kind of, it's not television. Listen to your safety director, listen to your counsel. Those are things they can do that should be easy to do. Cell phone is the biggest thing we have to deal with usually right now with the driver. Don't delete anything off it. Don't throw it away. We've got a number of those. They think they throw away the phone, it's all good. They're nothing else is, that doesn't happen. We can get anything we want now from cell phone providers. So it doesn't work. So don't throw that kind of stuff away. Don't throw away anything in your truck, quite frankly, until I get a chance to look at it. I want to see what it is in the situation you were. Don't talk to anybody else about the accident. It's just so commonplace. I tell people, listen, you got a spouse, a significant other. Yeah, it's natural to want to talk to them about it. Don't talk to your neighbors. Don't be putting stuff on social media about it. Those are I'll say the softballs we can throw at our drivers to hopefully they'll cooperate with. And most important, don't make any kind of admission at the scene. Don't run out of the car. Oh my God, I'm so sorry I did X, Y, Z. That stuff we don't need, because sometimes there's actually another reason. They didn't see all the facts. They didn't know that this person actually did something they shouldn't have been doing, the person that they hit, and they make some assumptions. And so the less talking they do, the better, quite frankly. So what can they do? They can be quiet and just wait for advice from their management and or counsel, and don't throw things away, and just don't be a blabbermouth at the scene. Simplest terms I can put it in. Leslie, I say this, there was when you mentioned about the when to DOT test and when not to test for an accident, I actually had a slide. I guess I had taken it out from an earlier draft. I can pop it up real quickly. It's got a site to it, and I can happily send this around. Let me just pop it up real quickly, because it basically follows about the rule that you said. you always do testing when there's a fatality, always when the truck driver gets a citation. Those are the general reasons you have to test in a post-accident scenario. And they give a website down at the bottom. This same chart's available through the FMCSA website. And like I said, I can pass the website along easily enough, and people can pull it up at their leisure if they'd like.
That's fantastic, because I think that is something that we'll see DOT drug screens post-accident come through, and it's just been a fender bender, and the driver wasn't at fault and whatnot. Again, as Kevin said, and Dennis as well, if your policy requires it, then of course you want to go through with it, but just make sure that you're doing non-DOT testing when the accident doesn't meet this criteria, because the DOT doesn't like that doesn't like that either. So. All right. We've answered all the questions. I think it would be helpful, Dennis, and thank you for offering to send that
Certainly.
the checklist that we can give to those drivers.
Yes.
Send that out ahead of time. One thing that, as we talked about in another session that Dennis led that I attended, was we talked about pictures and taking a 360-degree view of the scene, and when you're taking pictures of the scene, start, way out and then take 2 steps in and take another one till you get right up on the scene of the accident. I think gives your counsel and gives everybody a little bit more context to the accident scene. Dennis, do you want to, is that still?
Yeah, that's a great point. And what we like to put stuff like that out. And thanks for reminding me of that. Actually, I didn't. And there's it's tough to teach drivers everything, obviously, on what to do and what's not to do. And that's one of the reasons when we get on scene, we make sure we get it done, or if we get an accident or an independent adjuster, somebody on scene, they know exactly hey, we want to get as much of the data as possible. And that's why body cam has really helped with that, because we've got the officers walking around and showing us pretty much everything. So it's taken away some of our need to get some of that type of information, but you don't always have that. You don't always have it timely, and we don't always have dash cam either. But those video components have really helped us with piecing together things at the time of the accident. But in short, you're right. You want to get different angles. You want to be able to get distance and get perspective of everything around you.
Cool. Great.
Thanks, Leslie.
So I think that wraps up all of our questions. Joseph, I'll let you take it from here, and thanks we've gone over our usuals a lot of time, a little bit more, but I think that it's been fantastic information. So, but Joseph, if you want to wrap up.
Hey, Leslie.
Yeah.
I stuck in the chat. I was typing in just some parts of the regulation, just parts that I would review. You're absolutely right, George. I learned that a long time ago.
Nice.
But I typed in some parts there, that 395.51 DQ file, just for a quick reference, so you can go back and look at what I'm going to look at and look what the regulatory compliance requires. 396, 393 is vehicle maintenance. 391 covers your MEC. 382 controlled substance. 383 CDL, and then most important is this 396.17 for your annual inspections, and 396.19 for your inspector qualifications. It talks about the forms that you have to have on file for every annual inspection mechanic that performed that annual inspection. Those are huge in a crash, so be aware of those.
Great, thanks. All right. Sorry. Joseph, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, Dennis, Kevin, we do appreciate your time, and we appreciate the presentation. That's awesome information that I think all of us here can take and use on a daily basis, and hopefully we're not having incidents on a daily basis, but at least making sure that our qualification files and our drug and alcohol and all the things that's required, and we know that it's ever changing, and so that's why it's important for us to have these kind of training opportunities. So I appreciate you guys being involved in it. Leslie, thank you for moderating the questions for us as well. And if no one else has anything, I don't want to take up no more of anyone's day, but we appreciate everything, and I hope everyone has a safe rest of the day, safe rest of the week, and stay out of the storms.